Well, hey, church, welcome to Afterthoughts, episode 15. Probably a little confused right now because I'm Taylor and not Sam, and this is
I'm Gavin.
and
Here I am.
not Greg.
Not Greg.
So
It's a weird week.
it's a weird week, man. This table has never seen something so chaotic before. The two of us.
Yeah, we could call it the B team, but I like to call it the B plus team.
I'll
So
take
there
the
we
plus. It's better when I was in high school. And C average. So B plus is great.
We'll go with it.
Well, again, welcome to just a few moments, hopefully this week, that we can recap Gavin's sermon from this past weekend, which was out of Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 through 35, where Peter asked a pretty important question about forgiveness. And ultimately, it's a passage that we can pull a lot of, I think, instrumental pieces in terms of like the expanse of forgiveness, right? So tell us a little bit about your thoughts behind your sermon and the text, and then we'll kind of walk through maybe some other pieces that I think would be great to expand on more.
Yeah, so, in the context, Matthew 18 is all about that Christian community, and Greg was talking last week about, if your brother sins, and then just, if your brother sins against you, what should you do? And, there are a lot of practical advice that Jesus gave, but then when he comes into this passage, it's really started with Peter's question, which I kind of made the point, and I kind of want to say it again for Peter's sake. It's like, Peter asks good questions.
Yeah.
We kind of make fun of him for, putting himself out there and
That's right.
everything like that. But the truth of the matter is that if he didn't ask those questions, we wouldn't have the gold and the scripture that we do. And the question he really asks is, how many times should I forgive?
Oh.
And then I love that he puts out a number.
Yeah.
7.
Yeah. Very specific number.
Oh,
right?
yeah. And it's a very Hebrew
a fairly
number.
low number, too,
Oh, yeah. But like a Hebrew number is like, hey, 7.
Yeah.
And that's the Hebrew number for perfection. It's like,
Right.
hey, I'm trying to be really good
Yeah,
here.
that's
How
right.
about 7?
Yeah.
Which is higher, like I pointed out, it's higher than the rabbis at the time. But, I think I mentioned in the sermon that, and it dawned on me when I was studying the passage, that what Peter's really asking about is, where's the limit?
Yeah.
At when can I finally turn around and start really being angry at these people like maybe I want to be?
Yeah. That's right.
What's
yeah.
the limit to love?
Yeah.
And how many times does somebody have to mess me over before I get to mess them over?
Yeah. I mean, it's essentially a question that not only is Peter asking in Matthew chapter 18, it's probably a question that you and I and pretty much everybody asks on a fairly regular basis, right? There's no question that we live in a world that's broken, and because of a broken world, things are done to us, things are said about us that are hurtful and painful and cause, maybe some wounds, some psychological wounds, right? And so there's a part of us that, is like, hey, God, when can I be bitter?
Right.
How
much do I have to take, and
Right.
when will they have pushed me too far?
Right. And when are you gonna give me permission, God, to be upset and angry and to hold a grudge?
Yeah, when can I be Liam Neeson? When can I
Right.
turn?
Right. When can I turn and hijack the subway
Yes.
and do what I got to do, whether it's on an airplane to subway. I mean, I loved your references yesterday you referenced the Taken movies.
Yeah.
John Wick was another one.
John Wick,
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4. Well, Greg pointed out it's just John Wick, not John Wick 1. But,
Right. That's right. Yeah. No, I was sitting in service and you're referencing all these movies and man, Gavin is the go-to guy when it comes to movie quotes.
I like the
it
movies.
all.
I like the movies.
Yeah. So essentially Peter's saying hey, where is the limit to love? Where is the limit to forgiveness? And it kind of brought me to a place of reflection over the book of Psalm chapter 103, because that's really a passage where we're seeing that there is no limit, right?
Mhm.
Share a little bit about your thoughts on Psalm, 103, where it's essentially saying, that as far as from the east is from the west, there's this expanse of forgiveness, and it just keeps going, right?
Yeah.
It's not 7 times, it's not 10 times to forgive before you're like, all right, I'm gonna hold the grudge now. It's okay now to be bitter. He's saying, hey, listen, God sent Jesus. I mean, John chapter 3, verse 16 says, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life, right? Yeah. And so essentially what he's saying is no matter what sin you have committed or you are committing or you will do, from as far as the east is from the west, it is forgiven. There is no end. There is no conclusion, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's just it. Like Jesus' response to Peter's question about, whether you interpret it 7 times 70, 490, or 77, either way, he's trying to give this idea of what Psalm 103 kind of mentions. And like I quoted just part of this, psalm, but he does not treat us as our sins deserve or repay us according to our iniquities. Like that's not his desire. And like that's kind of I think what Jesus is getting at is like this is about love. It's not about revenge.
Right.
It's not about reaching an end to it. It's about getting love so expansive that it literally your love is as far as from the east as from the west, right? Not to say that sin doesn't matter, but where sin abounds, love in grace superabounds, as it says in Romans 5. And that's, just not a thought I think a lot of us want to get to. We again, are looking for that limit. We are looking to know when we've been pushed too far. And yet God is like, hey, this, as far as the east is the west, this is my commitment. This is my character. This is who I am. I made a big point in the sermon about what is in us versus what is in them. So often with forgiveness, we are looking to see the actions of the other to set whether we can love or not. And it isn't about the actions of the other. It's what's in us, is what it's our character. And wouldn't it be so redemptive in our world that no matter what's going on over there, I'm committed to love. As far as the east is from the west, I'm committed to 77 times or 490 times, 491, 492, etc.
Well, and I think one of the words that you used yesterday in reference to that point was this word condition, that someone else's either conviction and confession and eventual maybe apology shouldn't be the condition by which we forgive.
Yeah, and I think that's huge because, there are some passages that mention, if they repent and all of this kind of thing. But there are other passages in God's example with us, even while we were enemies.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so, again, it's that lifestyle of forgiveness. It's that commitment of forgiveness. It's whether I've got the love, and where my heart is. And so, again, not conditioned on them. That unconditional love that we kind of all are looking for.
That's right. We love to receive it.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly it, right? And that's the parable goes into that. Like the king, man, I loved it when I was forgiven the debt. But, man, doing that for other people, that is the challenge of this passage. And what makes this passage, honestly, so hard, and, I felt like I was trying to thread a very fine line, is because when you're talking about people who've been, debts have been, they're not getting paid back.
Yeah.
They're getting hurt.
Right.
They're getting really kicked around in life.
Yeah.
This passage can be really harsh. It's like, man, and I'm not forgiving enough too? Like, oh my goodness. And, I really tried to kind of cut through that and bring the conviction I think the passage is trying to bring, but in a compassionate way. That, like, this is about freedom, though, for you.
For you.
And inviting you to the fullness of God's love and to receive the fullness of God's love so that you're not defined by a debt that somebody else owes you. No. You're defined by the forgiveness and the love that God gave you.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't forgive so that the other person can feel good about themselves, right? We forgive because we need freedom from it. This is just as much a burden on us as it might be for them, right? But it's also not our nature to want to forgive and take a step forward, right? And like our society says that we should hold grudges, right? I mean,
100%.
look at our society as a whole, especially in the United States, and the division that we see and the hatred that we see. And I think a large part of that is influenced by this idea that we just kind of want to hate something sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and it gives us, I think, a sense of power, a sense of control. When you're hurt and you're feeling out of control in life, that anger is what we use to, there's a righteous expression to it. There was a debt, so that makes sense.
Right.
It's the question of what happens afterward. And, that's why I asked that. I thought it was an important question. Does your love control your anger? Does your anger control your love? That's such a big question because with God, it's not that there's not anger. You can read passages where God is upset with sin, but he chooses. It's what he chooses and who he chooses to be. And so his love when he is upset about something, when someone owes him a debt, when he's been sinned against, he chooses to respond. Yeah, a great book by a guy named David Powlison called Good and Angry. It's one of my favorites. And he just talks about that we tend to have love and anger in two different spaces. If I'm angry, then I can't be loving. If I'm loving, then I can't be angry. God does them together, but his love always directs his anger. So that his love is always controlling his anger. So his anger is always constructive. It's always for us. It's always working with us as opposed to condemning us. Romans 8:1, there's no condemnation. Or like even when Jesus finds the woman caught in adultery in John chapter 8, I don't condemn you. I'm not angry at you. This is not what this is about. But go and sin no more. You're killing yourself.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you had kind of made that point yesterday when you said something along the lines of, when we hold bitterness, when we hold unforgiveness, a lot of times we do that because it's our way of kind of playing the role of God, right? Like we want to hold these things over people's head for this sense of authority or control over them. And that's the point you're making now, is it's like God didn't do that with us. God was like, no, I'm not going to, I have authority. I have all the power, but I'm not angry at you. I'm just angry at the sin, and therefore walk in freedom, right? Take this next step. And I thought that was a great point that you had made yesterday. Something that you said a second ago, and I think this is a valuable point to acknowledge, is that the debt is absorbed, right? Like we can't ignore the fact that there was a debt owed, right? So instead of focusing on the debt being dismissed, instead we have to look and go, okay, the debt wasn't dismissed, it was absorbed. And in the parable, we see that it was absorbed by the king who was owed the 10,000 talents. He didn't just say, well, I don't need those 10,000 talents. He probably did need those 10,000 talents, but he was willing and had compassion, is the phrase that we see in our text and from the message on Sunday. He had compassion for the one who owed the debt, and he said, I am willing to take this debt on myself, right? What parallels would you make between that parable and, of course, the story of Jesus and us?
Well, that's just it, right? So that the debt, forgiveness in Christianity is so cool, right? Because like forgiveness, I think in the secular world, out in the world, and everybody kind of puts forgiveness and forgetting together. Sweep it under the rug. It doesn't matter. Just move on. Whatever phrases anybody uses. And
which doesn't work, by the way.
Oh,
you
no,
can't just move on.
It like something happened, didn't it? You know? And I think of that, I think it's in Psalm 55, maybe 56, but
we'll fact check it.
Yeah, we'll fact check. Like God records our tears in his scroll. Like it mattered what happened to you. And that's where Jesus' death on the cross, it's such a big concept, but like we are used to, because we love grace, we love when our debts are forgiven. Man, he died for my sins. Oh, he loves me so much. He died for the sins against you too. And can we condemn somebody whom God has forgiven? If he applied his debt. So and you're like, but Gavin, did it matter? Did God see it? Did he get away with it? No, he didn't. It was punished. It was paid for.
On the
cross.
Debt
was absorbed, not forgotten. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It was acknowledged. It mattered. It counted. You were seen. And I think people who hear about forgiveness in Christianity, they hear forget.
Right.
And they get upset. They're like, we can't forget what happened to me. And God didn't.
And I think we see that, I'm sure you see this often, and I've seen this in the counseling office too. Like that's when there's a lot of marital conflict, whether it's adultery or addiction, whatever it might be taking place. That's a lot of times the approach of the person who has wronged the other spouse, right? Like they're like, okay, can we just, now that it's out in the open, can we just forgive and forget? Can we just move on, you know? And there's people who try that, and it doesn't work. Like it might work for a small season, but because it's never been processed or discussed, it comes back, right? It's like compounding interest. You can push it down and ignore it, but eventually it comes back, right? And so this idea of Christian forgiveness is not about forgetting, right? And I
Right.
think that was such a good point that you made on Sunday was like, hey, this 10,000 talents that was due to this king, like he didn't just ignore the debt, he just
Yeah.
was willing to take it on himself,
Right.
right? Which I think is a great reminder as we roll into kind of, I mean, obviously Palm Sunday and walking through now, the week leading up to Easter, and we have Journey to the Cross happening, and we have Good Friday, and it's just what a great reminder that like our debt wasn't dismissed. It was paid in full.
Paid in
He
full.
absorbed it himself because John 3:16, for God so loved the world.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's so important. When if I kind of harped on it in the sermon, and harp maybe is a harsh word, but like I really think it's an important point because we tend to think, well, Jesus, this is easy for him. It wasn't. And his absorption of our debt, I mean, the cross of Christ, we see the wrath of God poured out on Jesus for something he didn't do. Talk about innocent. He was as innocent as it comes, and he didn't just suffer for, yeah, I mean, the whole world. That's where that 10,000 talents from the parable, I tried to picture just like that enormous debt put on somebody at one time for collection.
Yeah,
And Jesus said, I'll collect it so they will stop collecting each other's debt
that's right. Yeah,
from each other.
yeah,
And the idea, that hopefully love overcomes, that at Romans 12, you bless those who curse you, you overcome evil with actually good.
yeah,
And unforgiveness is where evil kind of determines who you are, and you're starting to return evil for evil. And it's about vengeance,
yeah,
and it's about self-protection, and it's about anger, and that's the tragedy. The passage for me, the unforgiveness is that, man, not only was I forgiven this tremendous debt from God, but I'm not really enjoying it
right. Yeah,
because I'm going around trying to collect debts from other
yeah,
people and lock
yeah,
people in prison, and then I'm the only one who ends up in prison.
that's right. Yeah,
And it's like, this isn't the freedom that Christ purchased for you.
right.
He purchased you so that you would be as forgiving, because that is walking in freedom.
Yeah,
And hopefully that's a beautiful thing for people who, man, you don't know what happened to me, Gavin. I was like, okay, I don't because
right.
I'm human.
It's fair. Yeah,
But God does, because he paid actually that debt.
yeah.
He
already
actually
did that.
tallied it up,
Yeah.
and he counted it, and it was part of the debt that
Yeah.
was owed that he paid.
Yeah. Well, and to your point of it not being an easy thing for Jesus, I mean, we see that just prior to his arrest, right? I mean, he's the one that in prayer goes to his father and says, "If this cup can pass," like
Yeah.
he knew it wasn't going to be easy. Like,
Yeah.
he Jesus is God, but he was also in the flesh. Like he knew it was going to be painful. He
It was
knew
gonna be
that this
hard.
was going to be brutal, right?
Yeah.
And he was going to die this criminal's death. And so he made kind of one last plea with his father, going, "Hey, if there's like any other way, like, because this is going to be
Yeah.
hard. If there's any other way," but he then said, "But if not, I'm willing."
Yes.
Which is what we again go back to this parable in Matthew chapter 18, and the king was like, "I'm willing."
Now that's what
Yeah.
I think, like the person sitting there, at home in the moment of, can I forgive? Can I not? That may be all the faith that is needed to start. Are you willing?
Yeah.
Are you willing to get to a place of forgiveness? And a lot of writers are going to point out forgiveness is both an event and a process.
Right,
But
yeah.
the event part of it is, I think, that willingness, like this is the right way. I don't want to live in prison. Jesus, I do acknowledge you've paid the debt. So my response here, how can I work my way back to loving like you love?
Yeah.
And that's the event. And the process is sort of figuring that out. I mean, the story doesn't go on further. Yeah, you'd
Right.
love to know what happened the next
Yeah,
day with
that's
the
right.
king and that guy. Would the king give that guy another loan?
Yeah.
Again, forgiveness versus trust.
Yeah.
But I think the point is he didn't hold him hostage.
Yeah.
Well, hey, you're a guy that doesn't pay back debts. I'm never working with you ever again.
Yeah.
No. He continues to work with him wisely
Right.
from where the guy is.
Yeah.
Well, and the guy ended up in prison, so
Right.
even that was part of how God
Yeah.
interacted with
Right.
him.
Well, he ended up in prison because the forgiveness that was given to him was not reciprocated to those around
Right.
him that owed him, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably where we turn somewhat practical today is this idea that like so many of us are walking around freely receiving the gift of forgiveness from the Lord, but at the same time, in the same breath, we're walking around trying to collect debt through bitterness
Oh yeah.
with our coworkers,
Yep.
maybe with our spouses, our
Don't say
estranged
that. The
kids.
spouses, are you kidding?
Yeah, right. And so, I think that was a major point that we saw on Sunday was like, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 1, it says, be imitators or be mirrors, be like Christ, right?
Yeah.
Well, one of the best ways we can be like Jesus is to love like Jesus.
Yes.
And so based on everything that we've already said, Psalm 103, Matthew 18, and we see that Jesus loved, John 3:16, Jesus loved so much that he was willing to take on our debt, to forgive it, to absorb it himself. So if we're to be like Jesus, that means that we may have to absorb some things that people have done to us or said about
Yeah,
us, right?
and that's kind of the point of human relationships. Like everybody is like, okay, what does payback look like? And you get stuck when you get wounded looking backwards in time, and like, man, I wish that didn't ever happen.
Yeah.
How are we going to ever move forward because our relationship is now ruined because of this? And I pointed it out. Relationships only do move forward.
Yeah.
And honestly, we don't have anything within our human ability to deal with people's really big sins against us.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing to it but debt absorption. And the cool thing about the parable is we don't absorb the debt. The king
That's right.
is absorbing the debt. And that's so crucial because I honestly don't know if people don't have faith in Christ, how they do it.
Yeah.
Because without somebody absorbing the debt, then it really seems like it doesn't matter.
Right.
But with Christ, the debt is absorbed. It really does matter. And so that frees me up. He is going to collect.
That's right.
He is going to deal with my spouse or my coworker. Vengeance is his. He will repay.
Yeah.
He'll do the judging piece of it. My job is, okay, how can I be constructive again? How can I work back toward forgiveness? And I gave out that chart, the patient and the prosecutor.
That was great. So practical.
Trying to be, because a lot of us battle with, okay, what does forgiveness look like? And the subtleties of it. And, I just happen to have that chart right here, just
What
in
a
case.
coincidence.
What a coincidence. I mean, props and everything. But, the patient is someone who wants to heal. The prosecutor is someone who wants to be right about that other person.
Yeah.
And one is a constructive mindset. The other is a destructive mindset. One is trying to be free and learning to love and grow. And the other one is trying to hold somebody in prison.
Yeah.
And, there's all sorts of subtleties to it, And I put in the chart, patients, they don't just like not deal with stuff. So forgiveness doesn't mean, hey, we're not going to deal with this. If somebody's repeatedly sinning against you, we got to go back to Greg's passage from last week.
Yeah.
If someone sins against you, go and tell them.
That's
Let's keep working on this thing. That can be part of the forgiveness process.
Yeah.
Not to say that it's conditional on their changed behavior. We get into a forgiving place with God to love them again so that when we confront them, we do it lovingly. Or as Ephesians 4:25, speak the truth in love.
In love. Yeah.
But, I mean, we got to get to that forgiving place to be able to do that.
That's right.
Yeah. And so that's why this parable goes together so well with Greg's sermon and, but risking staying open. And one of the things I point out with forgiveness is if you're looking to feel better based on their behavior, then you're looking in the wrong spot.
Right.
Where your eyes are to get to that forgiving place has to be on God's grace to us, not on their behavior, because chances are, if they've hurt us, they haven't figured it out yet.
That's right.
It's going to take a little while. There's a process to it, and we're going to need to be patient in that process. Progress over perfection, it works in workouts, but it also works in forgiveness, right?
Relationships,
If you're looking for perfection, anything less is just not acceptable.
Yeah.
That's usually a bitterness mindset than a patient process.
Well, and I think it's important to note, too, that a lot of times we're more focused on holding on to unforgiveness to prove a point, right? And that's when we go back to talk about playing God. But something that you had said was forgiving somebody, and I think this is so valuable. It's so important. Forgiving somebody does not make them right. Right? You're not forgiving saying, okay, you're right, I'm wrong. That's not the point of forgiveness.
It's a debt. I mean, you're admitting there's a debt, so it's actually confessing that they're wrong.
Right. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, and to kind of wrap things up, you said that this week's message really tied well together with Greg's message from Matthew 18 last week, talking about conflict resolution. And in our small group this past weekend, that was a major topic of discussion, and we were like, man, I think it's the way it is for a reason,
Yeah.
because essentially Matthew chapter 18 from 2 weeks ago, Greg's teaching on conflict resolution, and there's basically the three steps, right? One
Hmm.
on one on two or three,
Yeah.
and then if the conflict isn't resolved, or the person doesn't have any type of confession or repentance, then you bring it to the church,
Yeah.
right? But it says after that, like if there's still not any kind of resolution or repentance, then it says to treat them like Jesus treated the tax collectors, which meant he didn't keep them necessarily at a distance. He still prayed for them and gave
Hmm.
them grace. But there is also kind of a broken relationship there, where you're like, all right, listen, like until you have this conviction,
Yeah.
until you see this in yourself. But then that brings us to this week's passage, where it's like,
Right.
okay, well, what if I get through step 3?
Yeah.
Now what? Like, because I still have, even though they don't want to resolve the conflict between the two of us,
Yeah.
I still have this kind of burden in my life. And I think that's where this part of Matthew chapter 18, verse 21 through 35 comes in and goes, hey, you may still have that burden, but you don't have to have that burden.
That's right. You release that burden. And, I had a friend talking to me this week, and they said, so what does this mean? The person who doesn't acknowledge their debt to me, who, I just feel every time I see him, I need to pretend.
Yeah.
And we talked about it, and we said, you don't need to pretend. You need to forgive.
Right. Yeah. That's right.
So you actually forgive them, and then you don't have to pretend. You love them. It's interesting that, the parallel, treat them like a tax collector, or, at the end of the Matthew 18, Jesus had dinner with tax collectors.
Yeah, that's right.
And
He
I
still
don't-
communed with them.
Yeah, I don't think and even the Pharisees who were against him. If anybody insulted anybody and wronged somebody, the Pharisees wronged Jesus. And yet he continues to have dinner with them, and I don't think he was pretending.
Right. Yeah.
I
It's
think
because he had compassion.
it's because he had compassion, because there was something in him. He had a forgiveness for them that kept going back. And we think, man, that's maybe a weak person who, it wasn't because Jesus was codependent and needed their approval.
Yeah.
It's because he loved us. God so loved the world.
Yeah.
So he just kept going after the world. Even when the world gave their worst, Jesus continued to give his best. That's the challenge of the passage. That we aren't overcome by people's debts to us. We overcome the debts with the love of God in our lives. And we become more than conquerors.
Yeah.
And so we don't pretend with the person who's hurt us. We're actually kind to them.
Yeah.
And they don't know what to do with that sometimes. They're like, why is this person being so nice to me?
Yeah.
Talk to Jesus, because he paid my debt.
That's
and his
right.
love is incredible, and it has height and width and depth, and I'm learning that.
That's right.
And hopefully that's what's coming out of my
Yeah.
heart.
Well, and use the word conquerors, and when I think about the word conquerors, I think about freedom and victory,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's in regards to conquering in war or relational conflict, I think it all proves to be the same, right? There's a freedom and there's a victory, and I kind of want to land the plane here, where essentially on Sunday, you kind of taught this main point of, like, you don't forgive for others, you forgive for freedom.
Yes.
Right, like you're feeling this burden of this conflict or this bitterness or whatever it might be, and there's a part of you that wants to hold that over someone, but you're also walking day by day with this heaviness, that the only way to get rid of it, the only way to resolve that burden or that weight that you're feeling, is to forgive, not for their sake, but for your sake, right? To walk in freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would be the passage is not about forgiveness guilt. It's about freedom. It's about not, we're bound to the ones who hurt us, I think I said in the sermon. And they really do control us. And it's sad, because then we suffer two things. We suffer the wound itself, and then we suffer being in a jail cell,
Right.
hoping that they were in that jail cell.
Right.
And we're tied to them for way longer than we should be. And God's just saying, you don't have to be tied to them. Be tied to my love.
Yeah.
Be free. Walk around with a lightness about you, ready to trust again, ready to care again, ready to love again. Because I know a lot of times we think in our hearts, like, man, I was such a fool. No, you weren't. If you loved somebody, you weren't a fool. You were loving. And you got hurt.
That's right.
That happens when you love somebody. Don't stop loving. That's never was foolish. It was foolish that they took advantage of your trust.
Yeah, that's right.
But we don't want to become angry, because for that day they maybe finally turn. If they turn to loving, and we're stuck in anger, then we're still in anger.
Right. Yeah.
But if we want to be free, we got to come around to the heart of God and how he sees people. And then we are really walking free to serve people, free to love people. We don't even have to pretend. It's just who we are.
Yeah. Well, and I think, walking in freedom makes room for what the Lord wants to do, not just in us, but through us.
Yeah.
Because we had somebody we were talking to the other day, and she had a particular conflict that was ongoing for several years.
Yeah.
And that conflict could have been resolved months ago.
Yeah.
But she chose to kind of be bitter about it for a little while.
Yeah. Sometimes if we say it feels good, even though it doesn't feel good.
Right. And so a couple of weeks ago, she chose through the conviction of the Lord to finally forgive.
Yeah.
And she did, and almost immediately, in her words, almost immediately, she started to hear from the Lord like she's never heard before, experience and encounter the Lord like she's never encountered before. And I think about not just our encounter with the Lord, but also, to bring in our mission statement, also the embrace and the embody.
Mm-hmm.
Like, her encounters in worship have already been 10 times elevated, and she's hearing and experiencing the Lord in worship. But also, when it comes to embracing and embodying, she's like, man, I'm hearing from the Lord like never before. I'm encountering him like never before. But also, like, in terms of like our Ephesians 2:10 calling, like, we are created as his workmanship for his purposes and for his will and way in our lives. And she's like, I'm seeing it again for the first time in a long time.
Well, and that's the freedom I think you're talking about, right? That is where, unforgiveness, in so many spiritual circles and healing prayer teams, 90%, this one lady said 90% of spiritual issues are usually tied, she said, to unforgiveness. They find that so often with people as they're healing, trying to pray to heal people, and unforgiveness. And it really causes a major disconnect. That's what the parable says. Like, my Father and you may not be seeing eye to eye because he's committed to love in the world.
Right.
And you're stuck in this place. And so, yes, you can get stuck spiritually in your relationship with God. And he doesn't want that, and he's hoping that when you forgive, now we're moving in concert with God. Yeah. We are working together, and I do think we'll hear from him. I love that story because I love, like, man, think about like unforgiveness clogging your ears, and then you forgive and you unclog your ears, and man, God, all of a sudden, God and I are moving together again because our heart is resonating with his heart. We are overcoming evil with good. We are bringing love into a loveless world. And like, our benediction, love where there is no love,
Yeah. So essentially, to kind of close things out, forgiveness leads to freedom, and freedom makes room in your life for God to do what he wants to in you and also through you. So this week, as we kind of wrap up, the challenge is who is it that you're holding the bitterness towards? And acknowledge that just like Christ died on the cross to pay your debts, to absorb our debts, he also did that for them as well. And so lean into the fact that they don't owe a debt anymore. They may have hurt you. They may have caused you some kind of pain of some sort, but the reality of it is they've been forgiven too, and we should live in that freedom, that we don't have to hold on to those debts anymore because Jesus already paid it. So who is it you need to forgive? Who is it you need to send that text to right now, or make that phone call, send that email? Probably more likely make the phone call. It'd be a little bit better, right?
I think that sounds
like
a phone call.
Yeah, it'd be a weird
right
email. Like, probably
maybe
get
even
ignored.
in person. Who knows?
Yeah, you get ghosted or whatever. But who is that person, and what next steps are you taking this week? Not to forgive them for their sake, but for your sake and the freedom that you should walk in, so that God can do what he wants to do in you and through you. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. Sam and Greg will be back, so it'll be the A team again.
A team again. B+. We did all right.
B+. Yeah, average.
All right.
So, all right, guys. Have a great week.
See you.